getting your own story. I was very shocked by this, profoundly shocked. And that's why my first question to you, Jurri, was how much did you know about me before you wrote this? It caught me off guard, and it was quite a fun adventure. I'm really loving it, and I'll be watching it again. I'm so excited about my new freedom and my new liberty and all the affirmations that you spoke to my life. I'm usually the encouraging person in people's lives. This has been a huge encouragement to me, Jurri. You clearly have a gift of hearing from the Lord, and I affirm that, and I can tell everybody that you and I have not exchanged any biographical information about each other before this, which affirms a really super unique gifting that you have, and I applaud you, and I'm excited about seeing it blossom further.
It's a life-altering, encouraging word that will change your life forever if you apply it, and it's totally worth the investment to do it. Don't hesitate. Don't wonder, is this right for me? Is this the right time for me? Just do it now, because you need the encouragement now. Don't wait.
And as far as the podcast goes and becoming a legend, I encourage everyone to really just pray and talk to God about it. And if you feel led to get or to sign up to get one, I strongly encourage it, because not only did this edify what God is doing in my life, but it also gave me the ability to share what He's done in my life with you guys. So that if any of you needed to hear specific things that were said by either the story or by the guest, that it really allows people to hear that, and it really allows them to get your story on top of the story that you wrote with us.
Brilliantly said. Thank you, John.
I would just recommend it to get a story, because it's the most unique thing I've heard of, but it is so anointed. So I would do it for two reasons. One is because it's anointed and you're hearing from God, and that in itself is a beautiful thing, to have God use somebody else to tell you something about yourself. So I would do it for that. And I also would do it to spur another person's passion to help sow into what you're doing, because we need people like you who are pioneers, who are boundary pushers, who want to pursue something not everyone's pursuing. We want to give you encouragement, and we want to love on you, and that's one way we can do it, since we don't get to see you in person.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This was such an amazing experience, honestly, and I am so grateful that literally the Lord has given you this gift, because it really is powerful and impacting for me tonight. And I'm sure by just me hearing you just read my story to me, it was so touching, and it's what I needed to hear for this week. And I know a lot of people felt that way if they've come on your show, so I definitely thank you so much for your work, and definitely just keep staying in this field. It is a true blessing. Thank you.
Wow, man, Lacey, thank you for saying that. And hello, welcome to the Legends of the Wind podcast. I'm Jurri Schenck. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have our special guest with us, Kristi Graner. Thank you, Kristi, for joining us. How are you doing? Wonderful, and I hope everybody can hear you on your microphone. Welcome, everybody. Let me know if you can hear Kristi just in the chat, if you don't mind. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're new to the show, I'd like to introduce what it is about prophetic storytelling. It's a unique, creative, artistic expression of the prophetic. It's kind of like painting a picture of a portrait, but it's doing it in story form. And if you haven't done so already, would you please hit the subscribe button and like this video? And cannot hear you. They say they can't hear you. Let me see here. Kristi, can you talk, please? Okay, I'm going to... Just a minute. I'm going to have to do it this way. Go ahead and talk.
Okay. All right.
So,
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
can everybody hear her now, guys? We've been having some technical setup problems tonight. Everyone, can you hear her? Go ahead and talk, Kristi.
Okay, I'm talking, testing, and looking forward to hearing the story.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry about this. They still cannot hear you. Let's see here. I apologize.
Well, what I can see on the screen here, it's got a little red line through me, so I wonder if there's something that's wrong with the...
There's a red line, you said?
There's a red line through my picture that I'm seeing.
Okay. People say they can hear you now through my phone, so thanks, guys.
Okay.
I apologize,
Good.
Kristi. I've never encountered this particular issue before. Cool. But as long as everybody can hear each other, that's what counts. Cool. Very good. Okay, cool. So what is amazing about prophetic storytelling is that we reveal people's identity and destiny through story form. And the way, Kristi, to receive a prophetic story and the way the audience can understand it is that these stories are meant to be understood symbolically. They are not meant to be understood literally. And what's important is that there are hidden treasures in the story. And it's up to us in our conversation after the story to have the interpretation of them, to discover the hidden treasures and meaning in them. And then the goal is to be able to have revelation of the application of those hidden treasures. That way you come back with something that God has given you a valuable to. And that way you know what to do with your life and hopefully encourages you and strengthens you. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We have in our chat Alisha and Kylie, Gail, Joyce, Sandy Bull. Thank you very much for being on this program. So we've gotten a lot of comments from people on the previous shows, and the people want to get into the story sooner than later. Kristi, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience just so that we know a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Kristi Graner, and I am actually a pastor and a leader of a ministry called Dare to Believe. And I've taught on the prophetic for many years, and I am a dream interpreter. I learned under John Paul Jackson. So I get the storytelling stuff. It's very metaphorical. It's the way dreams are. So it's almost like you are given a dream that you get to share with somebody. So I'm anxious to hear how this works.
Great. Now, just so the audience knows, have we ever talked before tonight?
We've never met. I have some friends named Bray and Jill Wyckoff who are creatives as well, and they're common friends with you. And they through them I learned about your ministry and what you do. And so I asked you to do a story for my husband Gary, which he sent me on Christmas Eve, and I shared with him as a Christmas gift. And then now I'm hearing my story for the first time.
Well, brilliant. And by the way, my wife and I are very curious to hear Gary's response later after the show, if you want to share that, if that's okay. And it's funny that you talked about John Paul Jackson. I got this book that I use all the time for dream language interpretation.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of all that. And then, of course, sometimes numbers are important as well. So very cool. Well, thank you.
Metaphor, right?
Yes. And so thank you very much. Would you like to have your story?
Absolutely.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much for your patience with our technical problems. So here we go. Kristi, your story is titled Lions of Legacy. The power of the lion's jaw is incredible, crushing the neck of its foe, teeth piercing the skin, and releasing the breath of the vicious jackal. Here was Kristi, the lioness, fighting for her life as she cared for and protected her little ones. She covered the area and watched carefully for any enemy to cross the threshold of her camp. But today, that vicious jackal disguised himself in the tall grass and looked for the right opportunity to pounce. Today was the day of vision, but for Kristi, it would come at a price. The Sahara Desert was especially hot this year, and there was a drought that covered the land. Precious water was few and far between. Oasis after oasis seemed to dry up and only leave ponds of dust wherever they go. The animals of the land, both prey and predator, were in search of refreshing sustenance. They all asked each other, "Where can we go, for the water of life is missing?" There were many mirages in the land. The flashing sunlight deceived the eyes of many. There were those who looked to the future, but only saw doom in the setting sun. This was the lay of the land. Kristi the lioness took her little ones across the dry grasslands in search of food. The antelope and deer kept watch, because they knew their days were numbered. However, the jackals were more sneaky and clever, always hiding in the lowlands of grass. The pride of the land felt very humbled. They could only move forward into the light and look forward to the dawn. They knew their king would rise again. As Kristi led her cubs across the way, they came to some rocks that stood around them. They marched up an incline that led to a cliff with a drop-off far down below. The path narrowed and took them to the edge and along the way. Soon they went single file. If they made one misstep, one of them would fall to their deaths. Kristi sniffed the air, and she knew something dangerous was ahead. The laughing cackle and yipping of the jackals rang through the air. Kristi, the lioness, stopped and looked ahead on their narrow path. 3 jackals came their way. More yipping belted out from behind. Kristi turned to look, and there were 3 more jackals heading to the cubs behind. Kristi called out, "Come, my children, gather to me, do not fear." The lioness turned toward the jackals that came to her. She could see the closest one was the leader of the pack. Kristi growled and snarled aloud, "You come any further, I will shred you and your pack." The jackal leader laughed. "There are more of us than of you, sweet lioness. I believe dinner is served." The cubs hid under the legs of Kristi, and they all looked in all the directions in fear. Kristi took measure of her situation. The pack of jackals surrounded them. The rock wall rose high above them, and the drop below their path was easily 200 feet. Kristi could see in this difficult situation, however, her insight led her to a solution. With a tremendous surprise, Kristi roared a terrifying scream that startled both the jackals and the cubs. Kristi rose on her hind feet and put her front paws in the air with claws to bear. She swiped at the lead jackal, who yelped and pulled away. In an instant, Kristi snatched one of her cubs in the back of its neck and clawed and climbed up the wall with several leaps. The jackals jumped up and went after her, while the other cubs ran hard and went toward the jackals, passing through their feet. The distraction worked. Kristi and her cub in mouth jumped down onto the path and reached the other side of the jackal. They made it back together. The lioness and the cubs ran hard and continued their way along the path with jackals in tow, yipping and cackling their way. The lions leaped and soon found their way down the path to the valley floor, but a call for help came from the jackals. Within seconds, even more jackals on the valley floor found their way. Kristi and her cubs ran into the tall grass and found a lower part of the valley to hide. The pack of jackals looked around and sniffed, searching. The little ones shivered in fear, but Kristi had a message for them. "Little ones, now is not the time to be afraid or be passive. You are about to grow into the largest and strongest lions in this valley that they will ever know. I have trained you as your mother. You've seen me fight all the beasts of the land. Didn't I protect you? Didn't I provide for you? There is no time for fear. Listen to the desires of your heart. Know that the great Lion King gave you those desires. If you run with them, you will never fail. Do you understand?" All the cubs nodded their heads, and fire was in their eyes as courage rose in their hearts. One cub looked out and said, "Mama, do you see the opening there? We have a great opportunity. I see a home for us. I see a sanctuary. We can build our lives there. What do you think?" Kristi peered into the distance and knew what her little one saw was right. Kristi asked, "Do you think it's ours?" "I do," said the cub. "That's our home. Look, there's water. There's food for us." Kristi took a closer look and said, "It is full of great giant beasts, but no matter, it's ours. Let's go." The lioness and her cubs ran with all their hearts and left the tall grass while the pack of jackals saw their opportunity and roared after them. The hunt was on. Kristi and the cubs leaped with all their hearts and reached their new home and its rocks of protection. The cubs hid inside some of the rocky caves, and Kristi turned around to face her foes. Laughter and snarls came out of the jackals' mouths as they smacked their drooling lips. The leader said, "You can't hide any longer." They surrounded Kristi and walked counterclockwise around her. Kristi paced backward, looking to her right and left, and in front and behind. The beast trapped her as the cubs saw the end was near, and they shivered in even greater fear. The jackals all pounced on top of Kristi, and the battle kicked up a huge amount of dust. Kristi snapped her jaws and swiped her sharp claws in every direction she could. The jackals bit her legs and her ears and her tail. Two of the jackals jumped on top of her and went for her throat. Kristi cried out in pain. The cubs watched in horror and with tears in their eyes. "Mama!" cried one cub. Kristi flayed her arms around and kicked her feet and bit one jackal in the face. He cried out and fell to the ground, dead. This made the leader jackal even more angry, and he hissed at Kristi. With an incredible leap, he charged toward her. What happened next was one of the most terrifying battles of survival anyone had seen. All parties in the fight fought till their energy was gone. The dust covered the cubs' view. Rocks and dirt, fur and fangs flew everywhere. The yipping cried out, and soon all the jackals ran away. After a minute, the dust settled, and the cubs looked out to see the aftermath. On the ground lay Kristi, with her strong jaws gripping the neck of the dead jackal leader. Several bodies of dead jackals laid around her in the pit. Kristi had hardly any breath in her. The cubs all ran out to see Kristi, the great lioness, on the ground. Tears dripped down from their eyes. Kristi closed her eyes. A moment later, there was a rustle in the bushes a few feet away. A small stray jackal ran back into the pit with the great Lion King running after him. The king saw Kristi on the ground and the cubs surrounding her. He came to her and looked down at her face. "Dear great lioness, you have fought valiantly, and the battle seems great, but fear not. Your courage is not in vain." The great Lion King inhaled a deep breath and then exhaled and blew into Kristi's face. He said, "See life once again, my daughter." The power of the great lion's breath entered Kristi's body and filled her with energy. Sparkles of light flashed and shined all around. Kristi opened her eyes and looked up to see the great Lion King. She tried to focus. "Am I dead?" "Hardly, my daughter. You have won the battle." Kristi saw the dead leader, Jackal. The cubs all ran toward her and hugged and kissed her all over. Kristi climbed to her feet. "You saved me," she said as she bowed low. The great king replied, "You have battled much for the past season. Now you shall enjoy more and more victories. This land you have chosen is a good and wise decision. Therefore know that the jackals will not come here again. Your courage and might have demonstrated the spirit of your heart. You are the victor." And with that, the great Lion King roared a shout of victory. Kristi could not believe her eyes. Her sacrifice and leadership saved her cubs, and they found their home in the end. That night, Kristi rested on the shoulders of the great Lion King and felt his love. The moon shone down on the oasis, and the rain came. The clouds moistened the land, and they all experienced the refreshing dew. Kristi finally understood what it meant to occupy her promised land. Inceptio. So let me explain about Inceptio as we make the transition. So every time I give a prophetic story, I have to transition from it to a conversation. I need to help you out. The word Inceptio at the end of the story is Latin for the beginning. So other stories and movies will have the end, right? We do the opposite here. I paint a picture for you artistically in story form in the prophetic, and I hand you your future. So inceptio means you now may begin. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Great. So is there anything in your story that sticks out to you that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, it's just an awful lot. It's a lot to take in.
Yes.
I just wonder where at in that story we are right now. There's been a lot of battle, for sure. But I'm wondering, okay, so where am I? And you probably don't know that. You don't have the answer for me, but something to take to the Lord. Like, where am I? Am I just about at the end of the battle, hopefully? But yeah, I've been in ministry for many years, and there's been many tough battles along the way. Yeah.
Definitely. I understand. I think that the biggest thing that we can start off talking about is your relationship with the cubs. Mm-hmm. You've been in ministry for a very long time. You've seen a lot of things. And I think that your pastoral heart cares about those cubs. And I think this story reflects different seasons, really, of trials and tribulations with those cubs. Anything you want to start off with at any particular point in the story that connects in your real life?
Well, I would say I oversee. I'm an equipper of adults, and so the cubs are, I'm sure, people who come alongside, and I love to equip adults.
Yes.
And I've done that for a long time, but left the organized church about 14 years ago. I was a pastor in a church for 20 years, and then started a ministry called Dare to Believe, and it is all about equipping the saints. We have a ministry school there. We do inner healing and deliverance ministry. So a lot of the things that you're talking about, those are the battles, that's fighting the enemy straight on and watching people get their freedom. But I love that you ended with the great lion. What did you call him?
The great lion king.
The great lion, yeah, because none of that is possible without him.
Right.
And that's how we do it all. So I love that in the story, that really he's the one who fights the battle for us, and that he's the reason we have the authority to fight the battle. But yet there's a battle where we do get beat up and we do get bounced around. But,
yeah. And the jackals can represent many things, right? It can represent opposition, circumstances, the demonic, the spirit of religion, for example, accusations, fear. I mean, it can be all interpreted in various ways. I like, and just so you know, everybody, I wrote this story last night. I never interviewed Kristi. I never met her before. And I always take a huge risk every single time I do a prophetic story and come on the show and meet the person pretty much for the first time, like I have tonight. And that's my process. And so one of the things that I like is that in the midst of the battle, if I can find it here, let's see here, I've got so many pages. You gave encouragement to your cubs. Now is not the time to be afraid or passive. One of the things that my wife and I often talk about is how the religious church ends up making the people passive. Mm-hmm. And it says that, the desires of your heart, that when the great lion king gives you those desires, it's so important to pursue him in those desires. It's not selfish ambition. It's a permission to pursue. One of the things I like to say on this show often is what I call permission granted. So, Kristi, can you talk about how do you encourage your people, your cubs, to be proactive, or how do you encourage them in the desires of their heart? Does this word of exhortation in your story resonate with you?
Oh, for sure. I came out of a more religious background, and so that had to fight that, and fear was a big stumbling block in my family of origin, and so I overcame that personally, and then learned that that's a tool the enemy uses to hold people back from their destiny. So what I work with people in is finding out, okay, what is your destiny? What were you created to do and what were you created to be? And how do you overcome fear and just trust the Lord and step out in those things? And so I think that's what you're seeing when it's the cubs, and encouraging the cubs is that because I've broken through, my husband and I have broken through in those areas of our lives personally, we're able to lead other people in that area of breaking through and not being afraid. Wherever there's fear, there's a lie. So how do you overcome the lies? How do you get the truth? And walk in the truth of who you are and who God says you are, and believe that.
Yeah. And I look at the narrative of the story is that you're surrounded. You're in the front, from behind. You have a falling down to 100 feet below. You have a cliff ahead of you. Is there anything in your life that you would be willing to share that makes you feel like the enemy has surrounded you in any story where you overcame? Does that make sense if you were to briefly talk about that?
Well, there's a lot of them, actually.
Sure.
And, it's really interesting because I'm sitting here in my office and I have prophetic art that's been painted for me, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pictures that have been painted for me of lions. 6 prophetically of lions just right in front of me. So
wow,
it's interesting. Yeah. But yeah, it is a hard journey. And I grew up in a denomination where women didn't lead in the church. You could do a lot of things, but you really couldn't be a leader. And I never questioned that, but I had a leadership gift in my life. And so I ended up becoming a pastor without really thinking women can be pastors. But it just the fruit of it kept happening, and the leadership was in me. And but then I would run up against people and I doubted that in myself. Is it really true that women can be leaders in the body of Christ? And so that was one of the biggest surrounding things. And then when I kind of got past that and I began to move, I met John Paul Jackson. I began to move in things of the Holy Spirit. And I mean, I was growing by leaps and bounds. Then I encountered jealous brothers and sisters who really caused a lot of harm, caused a lot of harm to me. But at that point is when I chose to step out of the organized church. It just was like, okay, I need to move with the things that the Lord's doing in my life that are bringing life. And I think that's when you saw the lion breathing life. That's one of the times that the Lord just said, keep going. He told me that I had always thought his goal was to get people into the church, and the Lord loves his church. The Lord church is God's idea, but the Lord said, I'm going to teach you about kingdom, and my goal is to get people into the kingdom. And the church is part of equipping the saints for the kingdom, but people need the kingdom, they don't need church. And that's been the journey of the last 14 years with my husband and I. Is how do you get kingdom? Help people to see the perspective of kingdom. Church is good, and church is God's idea, but he's interested in people connecting to him and connecting to the kingdom of God.
Yes, and that's brilliantly said. And I want to thank you for your perseverance and courage in the natural realm, that you've walked through all this spiritual battles, and that your story completely echoes that. That's just so cool. And I think that you said you have lions painted all over in your office. That's so cool. That my wife Alisha recently painted a lion painting as well. And we have products and things like that feature her artwork. So I'll let you look at some of that later. But wow, that's so cool. So we have some comments in the chat. So guys, thank you in the chat for participating. Please continue to chat, and please continue to comment. Mike Smith says, hi, Jurri and Kristi. Kylie says, Dad offers dream interpretations. Jeb says, wonderfully written, lots of layers of meaning. Mike says, wow, great story of courage. And Sandy says a couple things, powerful images of what is coming. So true. Kristi is a great encourager. Wow. Thank you, Sally, for your encouragement. That's great. You talked about something of future images of what is coming. The story talks about that one of your cubs foresaw an opportunity, an opening, and that it was a place of home. It was a place of safety, and there was resources there. Is there anything in your life that echoes that kind of idea, that maybe that could be where you're heading next?
Well, yeah, we're in a very interesting time with our ministry. We've been in ministry for 14 years, and we just left a place we had been for probably 8 years, renting. Our landlord wanted a long-term lease, and we knew the Lord told us, no, you're not supposed to stay here long-term. I mean, we tried very hard in the natural to get a new place. We've been trying for like 3 or 4 years, and nothing has worked out. So we just gave our notice and ended up, we're renting now for 1 year from a local church, but it's not our permanent location, and we're trusting God to give us our permanent location.
Wow.
And it hasn't happened yet. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, okay, I'm trusting the Lord that one of our people will know what that is.
Yeah, that's cool, because that could be a great foretelling of prediction of what Holy Spirit's providing for you guys as a physical location, and that maybe it comes from a referral from someone in your group. That's amazing. So, and by the way, guys, I don't know Kristi. I never met her until tonight. So this is so cool.
Right.
Very cool. So I hope that encourages you and your people. Christine Berg says, what about the oasis? Now, in the story, it was many oases dried up and were ponds of dust, and then there were mirages that basically fooled you, and they were speakers of doom to the sunset, the end times, right? And then there's an oasis, there's a promise. So Kristi, if you were to speak about what would the oasis be, what is the vision in your heart? Like, what has God shown you? Like, what is it that you see and are believing for in that oasis, if that makes any sense?
Oh, well, I'm believing for, again, it's the ministry center, but that is a place where we can have interaction with our community, love on our community, do dream interpretations and things in a coffee shop setting.
Yeah.
Continue to have ministry rooms where we can do personal ministry, but also just be able to serve the community in a greater way with a permanent location. We're just kind of in transition now, In Abraham's life, he knew at one point where he couldn't stay any longer, but he didn't know where he was going.
Yeah.
That's where I am right now with the ministry and with all this. Yeah.
Right.
But that there's an oasis there. It's like, that's wonderful, and we're going for it, but we don't know what it is yet. And we've tried very hard in the natural to get there, and it has not worked yet.
Right.
So this is very encouraging to me, because it just raises up hope in my heart. Like, well, don't give up. It's there.
Yeah. Well, may I offer, just like as a help of encouragement to you, may this story be a symbolic oasis for you and your cubs. May this be something that, not just a word to you, but something corporately for the people that you minister to. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a guest named Dr. Nick Goff, who got a story about an attack from a fox, and he was an owl in this story. And then he met the spirit of wisdom in the representation of a wise owl. And I ended up tapping into a situation I knew nothing about, and I found out later that I thought this attack had happened years ago in his life, but it was a recent attack. And it was such an encouraging thing for him and his ministry and for his people. So I'm seeing this happening again tonight with you. I am so blown away that God would trust me to help ministries, like corporately. This is blowing my mind when it happens again. Oh my gosh. So I want to be able to bless you guys with this story. So, thank you for allowing me the opportunity. Before we go on to talking a little bit about Gary, and I know we don't have time to read his story, but is there anything about your story that still speaks to you that you would like to talk about?
Oh, well, it's interesting, because I don't like to share all that the enemy has done.
Sure, I understand.
I want to glorify what he's done, but I as you're telling the story, I felt very known by that, because it has been some pretty ugly stuff, and to keep picking yourself back up and going forward and
Right.
believing that God's got something for you, and not listening to criticisms of man,
Mm-hmm.
moving forward. So I felt very known by that, and
Wow.
it's a little bit like, oh, I don't like remembering that, but yet it feels good to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not imagined, it's not
Mm-hmm.
kind of man-made drama. This is real stuff that
Yep.
we plowed through, and the Lord sees us, and He is for us and will get us where we belong. So
Yeah,
that's encouraging.
and I understand, because we don't want to give glory to the enemy or the attacks, but it's, like you said, it's good to be
They're real.
understood. They're real. Oh yeah, but that makes me think about the great Lion King that shows up
Right.
in your story. When I was writing it last night, I'm literally watching it, and I'm getting the words, I'm getting the images, and I'm like, oh my, she's dead, or she's mortally wounded. And I'm on the edge of my seat going, oh, and the Cubs are watching. Oh, is this... I'm in the middle of it. And often when I get these stories, I don't know what I'm going to write. I don't know how it will end. It sets up a problem. I don't know how it will solve itself. And I saw your sort of passing, or almost passing, and the great Lion King showed up. And one thing I noticed is that Kristi, your character of the great lioness was active. You took action. A great story has an active character, not a passive character. And in your story, you paid the ultimate price with your life, with the sacrifice to defend your cubs. And then he came and breathed into you.
Well,
Go ahead.
and what I think of, when you say that, what I think of is when I was very burnt out when I left organized church.
Mhm.
And I'd been 20 years in this church, and it had grown. It was a great ministry, but I had gotten kind of beat up and was burnt out. And I left the ministry, and I said to the Lord, I don't care if I ever do ministry again. I really didn't. I just put it down. And I said, as long as I've got you, I don't care if I ever do ministry again. And that's the point where he picked me up and said, well, this is what I want you to do then. And he changed our direction. So I think that's what you were seeing, because I just said, I really don't want to do ministry again. If this is what it is, I don't want it.
Wow.
And he redirected. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, that's great that the story reflected that moment in your life and that turning point.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we pay a price for what we do. We have a gift, we have an anointing, we have a calling, and we go through crap and get beat up by all sorts of circumstances and people. And we all need that time of encounter, of encouragement. So I am so grateful that your story speaks to that encouragement to you and to your cubs. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to see if there's anything else. So if there's anybody in the chat that has any other additional comments, I totally would welcome that. Any questions, anything like that. So you ordered 2 stories, and I want to thank you for that. Your husband's Gary, is that correct, Gary?
Yes, and I think he's probably watching somewhere.
Oh, cool.
I haven't had a chance to really process his story with him yet, so I don't have a lot of information for you about his story.
Okay. Maybe another time we can schedule Gary to come on the show. I can read the story for the audience, and we can talk about it. If you want to set that up, we can totally do that. I would love to meet him. That would be great. Yeah, so I wrote Gary's story just in time for Christmas Eve. Kristi requested it as a Christmas present, and so it was a beautiful story. And when I read it to my wife, Alisha, she started crying. And as I was reading it, because I get the download, and I type it, and I clean it up. But when I was reading it to her, I was getting kind of, misty-eyed. And so let's work that out offline, okay? And we can schedule Gary.
Absolutely.
That'd be so cool.
Yeah, I do remember as I read it, because I did read it through briefly on Christmas Eve before I gave it to him.
Yes.
But then he's had it since then. But I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this guy was reading his mail. This is his life. So, I've been married to him for almost 40 years. So I would say that it was quite accurate. But
Good.
I can tell you more about that. Yeah.
That's exciting. Thank you very much. Yeah, like I said, I write these blind, and I'm like, oh God, Cool.
Well, it's a great use of the prophetic gift, so it's beautiful.
Thank you. So I want to open up the opportunity to the audience is to learn about our prophetic storytelling. Now, sometimes I get pushback from people in the audience or other guests as family members or friends, and they give me negative feedback about charging money for a prophetic story. And some people just don't understand the process, and they say that I'm following Lucifer, or I'm not a prophet, or I'm a Balaam, and I get a lot of flack about it. In the book of story of Saul, King Saul, he lost his donkeys, and it was a business problem. He missing his donkeys for his father, and he had no food, and he didn't know what to do. And his servant said, "Hey, there's Samuel the prophet, who everything he says comes true. Maybe he can help us." And Saul goes, "Hey, what do we have to give him? We don't have any food." And the servant said, "I have a little bit of silver. Let's honor the prophet and see if he can help us." That's one thing in the Bible that related to money as an honoring to the prophetic voice for a person's situation or need. Now, for me, this is not necessarily a ministry of a prophetic word. If you go to a prophetic word, that's in a church setting. But if you were painting a picture, if you were to commission someone to paint a portrait of you or of your pet or your family member, there's an artistic expression. It's a creative commissioned work. And that's what we do here. We combine the arts in storytelling for the prophetic. And so as you can tell from Kristi's testimony, it was ringing true for her. So if you guys really want to be participating and receive your own prophetic story, check the link in below in the video, or go to our website, legendsofthewind.com, and select the product, Become a Legend. And that way you can order yourself a story. I've done many of these, and by God's gift and grace and mercy, none of my words have fallen to the ground, and all the stories have truly impacted every single person and in a profound way. And so I'm always blown away by how God shows up for the person I'm reading their story to for the first time. So it's a super extraordinary experience, and it's a unique thing. My wife and I are pioneering this particular expression. So if you want to get a story, please check us out at legendsofthewind.com or look at the links below. Thank you. Kristi, thank you very much for being my guest. How was your experience tonight?
Pardon me?
How was your experience tonight?
Oh, I loved it. It was a little emotional as I just felt things rising up as you're describing it. It's like, oh my goodness, but it's a little bit healing as well, but very encouraging.
Wow, that's great. Well, I'm glad, and I'm really excited for Gary and seeing if there's any healing for his story as well, or any encouragement for him. Well, you guys have stuck around for the show this far. Thank you very much. If you haven't done so already, if you're new to the program, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and like this video? And please share it with your friends and family and let them know about what we're doing. One of the things is that there are a lot of people who are gifted in the spirit that are waiting in the wings, and there are new ways of doing things. God's cloud is always moving. And if we think that the prophetic is always the end all, the be all, and it's only done this way, we're actually missing out on the new wineskins that are coming. And I believe that what my wife and I are doing, along with other people, are part of those new wineskins. So we want to let people know about what we're doing and encourage people. I'm here to help and strengthen. If that makes any sense. Cool. Kristi, any final thoughts about tonight's show?
No, I would be curious at some point to hear your story and how you got into this. It is very unique, and you can obviously feel the Lord's presence on it. But
yeah,
how did you end up doing this?
Well, I'll try to be quick. So I started in children's ministry in California in Northridge at a church called Living Faith Christian Church. The pastors there were all part of the Kim Clement crew of people. Prophet Kim Clement, who passed away several years ago, was a profound prophetic voice, very accurate, very bold and risk-taking. His words still speak today in all sorts of ways. And I would go to all of his meetings. And I never had a direct mentorship relationship with Kim, but I saw his artistic expression, and I saw his boldness. I saw his courage and how he went for it. And he goes, well, people will say, what if you're wrong, Kim? And Kim would say, well, what if I'm right? And I just knew that I could do this. And so I actually had a dream with Kim Clement when he was still alive. I was just graduating from USC Film School. I had a dream where basically Kim opened up my ears and eyes prophetically to do what I do now. And then later I started in children's ministry, and God said one night, you will not only give words in a direct form, but you will tell a parable to the people, and you will hand them their future and let them finish their story. And then I learned about symbolism. I learned about shadowed language or dark sayings, which means that they're not evil because they're dark or shadow. It means that they hide treasures of truth. And it's up to us to have the aha moments to discover the hidden truths in them. So while someone may go to a church setting and receive prophetic ministry that's direct, this is different. This is an artistic expression. This is a story. And the pastors at LFCC and the parents were freaking out, not in a bad way. They were like, we've never seen the prophetic done this way. And I said, I was younger. I'm like, you mean no one else does what I do? And they all looked at me with this big eyes like, we've never heard of anybody doing it this way. And then my wife and I met, and she said, you need to start this into a business, because my wife is an illustrator. She does prophetic painting. She's trained in Art Center. And she said, you need to charge money for this story. It's a business. I'm like, wait a minute, I can't do that. She goes, why not? I paint prophetic paintings. Are you telling me I can't sell my artwork in a gallery? You are making a creative work. I'm like, are you sure? So I was a little hesitant. So I reached out to Kim Clement, and he actually responded back. And he wrote me a letter, a long email, and he said, you must charge money, because if you don't, you're doing a disservice to the kingdom. You have paid a price for the anointing you have. And he basically, in that email, endorsed us and said that many lives would be touched and encouraged by what you're doing. And they may not remember the words that you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so that's what happened. And so I started getting a publisher. I started working on things, and the podcast developed out of it, and it brought us to today. And that's kind of the quick version, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and thank you for your honor and for trusting me for this. I really appreciate it. You know, I've said before, and unfortunately one of my friends did this for me, I get jealous of you and others that I write for, because I know how significant these stories are and how a narrative is so specific in its details, and it's so encouraging to you. It's very rare that I get that coming to me. And as you probably know in the prophetic, like everyone says, you hear God's voice, you see in the spirit, and then I have to make a decision. I need to know what I need to do. And it's like crickets. And I'm like, God, I'm trying to help people. You need to help me, because I need to make some choices here. So I honestly do this as a sacrifice to you, to God, to you. Like Joseph is in the prison. He had a dream. And yet these two people, the cupbearer and the baker, had their dreams. In Joseph's sacrifice, he said, I will help interpret your dreams, believing that God will give me mine later. And that's the method and motivation I carry to do what I do. My wife and I are called to Hollywood. We are called to make incredible films and television shows. And I'm waiting for my dream to come true. And it's a very painful process. And so for me to serve you, Kristi, and to encourage you, I'm doing it out of a heart to see your life touched and the people that you serve, but also to know that I'm honoring him with what I have. Does that make sense?
Yes, and thank you for doing it. Yeah. Thank you for being faithful.
Thank you very much. Very much. Thank you. Well, Kristi, I don't want you to hang up on the video chat, but we're going to close the show, but I want to talk to you afterward offline, if that's okay. So,
Okay.
Very cool. So everyone in the audience, thank you so much for watching our podcast tonight. Thank you for letting me bless Kristi with her story, Lions of Legacy. Oh, that's one other thing I want to bring up real quick. Legacy. You are an amazing lioness in the spirit. And all the people that you have helped and all the people you will help will be a true legacy for you. And I want you to be blessed by your story, to impart to you strength and encouragement that you will find your promised land and enter your oasis, and that you will have a place of protection and the jackals won't take after you anymore. Legacy.
Amen to
That's
that,
for
yeah.
you. Very cool. Well,
Thank
guys, everyone in the chat, thank you for watching the show. Thank you for enjoying the storytelling. Thank you for letting me share my heart with you. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next broadcast. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Here we go.